Hello and welcome to my second Let's Read video, where I've been going through the issues of, well, EGM, but I shouldn't say that, the magazines that I worked for in the past, in chronological order. So previously, we read through Pocket Games, which was the first professional U.S. video game magazine that I wrote for. I'm going to move my water over here. On a freelance basis. And the reason that I got that, well, there's a few different reasons. One was my work on Gaming Enthusiast Online and, of course, on Gaming Age. But as I mentioned in the last video, the Gaming Age almost became like the de facto fan site for an IRC channel called VidGames, which, again, I maintain someone should do like a history of, because a lot of the people, and most of us were kids, hanging out there in the 90s, went on to, they're all over the video game industry. They're at Microsoft, they're at Bungie, they're at Blizzard, they're at 8.4. John Riccardi started 8.4. They're all over the place. And so that was kind of a few of the people that were in there were actually EGM writers at the time. So that was kind of how a lot of us made our way into the video game media. And so at this point in my life, I had been hired, excuse me, I'm dealing with a bit of a cold here. I'd been hired by John Riccardi to work at Expert Gamer. And I believe my freelance work on Pocket Games was kind of a final job audition, basically, to make sure that I could write more short form if I needed to. Ultimately, I really wanted to review games for a living. I didn't want to do guides, but there was no opening on OPM. There was no opening on Electronic Gaming Monthly, and John had an opportunity. He had an opening on Expert Gamer, and told me basically this was my opportunity to get my foot in the door and see where it went from there. So this is the November 1999 issue of Expert Gamer. Fun fact, this was not the first issue I was scheduled to work on. My work visa had cleared, and I was in the middle of sorting out my move, getting an apartment, moving down to Chicago from Halifax, which is obviously not a quick process. It was relatively quick for me because I didn't own a place up here. I was in my early 20s. I was only renting. I didn't have a lease. So, but still, still had to go through the whole song and dance of getting down there, finding an apartment, laying down rent, that sort of thing. And so what I was doing was actually working on a game for the December issue of Expert Gamer. I had this game at home, and I was playing through it, writing a guide for it. And for this issue, I actually got a call from John saying, like, we're down a person. We need someone to cover this game. We don't have the people to do it. Could you fly in Chicago, stay for a week, and churn out a guide for Final Fantasy VI, which you see here, Final Fantasy Anthology. This was the month that Expert Gamer covered it. So, of course, I said yes. I mean, Final Fantasy VI is one of my favorite games of all time. I had played through it like 4 times already. I was pretty intimately familiar with it. So, and obviously it was a chance to get down to Chicago and work for a week and hang out and be in a hotel and all that fun stuff. So, I absolutely said yes. But the best thing about this experience was that my flight got delayed. And so I flew into O'Hare. It was pretty late at night. And the nice thing about Ziff Davis is obviously they had a car service that they used to get people to and from the airport when they were visiting the office. So that's what they used for me. So they had a car there waiting for me, which was awesome. But they weren't taking me to my hotel. They were taking me to the office in Oak Brook, which I'd been to once before for my job interview. So it was dark by the time I got there. I want to say it was like at least 8 o'clock at night. And I get there, and I didn't really know how to get in. So I think I just ended up knocking. There might have been a buzzer at the front door, but it was the middle of the night. The receptionist wasn't there, Laura. And, but I was expecting that somebody at Expert Gamer would be there to greet me. So I think it was Gary Steinman who came to the door, who I think he's at Bethesda now, but he was the managing editor of the official PlayStation magazine. He came to the door, and he let me in, only to find out that nobody from Expert Gamer was at the office. And I got lucky in that the official PlayStation mag was actually on deadline, so they were there late, trying to get the issue out the door. I didn't know anyone on official PlayStation magazine. I shouldn't say that. I knew Mark McDonald, but I don't think he was there. And Gary Steinman knew who I was. He knew me from Gaming Age, and he was a fan of. I used to have a blog that I called the G Spot, which I wish I had a copy of somewhere. But he knew me from there. He was a big fan of there. So anyway, he let me in. They had just finished dinner, and they were sitting there working. And actually, interesting enough, one of their freelancers who was also in town to do some work for them, Doug Erickson, was actually a Gaming Age staffer as well. So I knew him. He was there typing the last few words for the issue. So I sat there. I met Gary, who I love. Gary's been a friend for a long time. Cranky old guy, but he's great. And sat there and listened to him complain about the fact that John didn't wait for me at the office. And I believe he drove me to my hotel. So anyway, I came in the next morning, met everybody, and I got to work. So this is Expert Gamer, November 1999 issue. So Expert Gamer was it was like Tips and Tricks, if anyone remembers that magazine. It was all about guides, walkthroughs for games, as well as tons of tricks. You see there's over 2,000 tricks, so we are definitely still at the point where GameFAQs existed, online, the internet existed, obviously, but people were still getting walkthroughs and tricks from magazines. Tricks was a huge part of each magazine, and you can see here it was a giant part. As we go through this issue, you're going to see just a giant part of Expert Gamer with 2,000 tricks. So yeah, November 1999 episode. I keep saying episode. Issue 65, I believe. Yes. So, Dino Crisis is our cover. We can get in here. And of course, hopefully, we're going to be able to see this. I'm going to stand up a little bit. This was when, of course, Donkey Kong Country 64 was coming out. I'm going to slide this over a little bit. We had a gatefold at the beginning here. Terrible, terrible game. I actually played this recently on Twitch. And boy, yeah, it was just not a good game at all. But it got decent reviews because it was Nintendo and it was Donkey Kong, and people were excited about that. So
we believe there are 5 perpetrators.
I've never seen anything like it. There's fruit everywhere. Look what they did to my taxi.
Donkey Kong is back in an adventure so big, it's taking the country by storm.
In reaction, the governor has called in additional troops.
We believe one of them looks like this.
They're just not civilized.
We urge caution as they are heavily armed with fruit.
I'd like to tell you the situation is under control, but it isn't.
This turbocharged game has better graphics, more moves, bigger bosses, huge worlds. It's so big we included an expansion pack to get it all in.
They didn't even tip me.
And now, this.
Donkey Kong 64, and you thought insanity was crazy.
Heaven help us all.
anyway, moving on. WrestleMania 2000. Also, a big deal on the N64 were the wrestling games. I'm not a big fan. I was never a big fan. They were fun to play. They're fun to play for a little while, but I never got super into them. But I remember these wrestling games being a big deal. Although I think the WCW versus NWO game is kind of considered like the greatest wrestling game on the N64. So here we are, the Masthead. And if you watched my Pocket Games episode, you'll remember how excited I was to see my name in a Masthead with that. So this took it, of course, to another level. I finally, I had my picture in a magazine for the first time, wearing that stupid hat. I don't even know what the brand was on that hat. John Riccardi, of course, my boss. He was the editor-in-chief of Expert Gamer at this point. Talking here a lot about the the new systems coming out, talking about how Nintendo's announced the 32-bit handheld, Sega with the successful Dreamcast launch, Sony unveiling the PlayStation 2. I love that there's no space between PlayStation and 2 here. We were writing it like that for a while. Rumors emerging from ECTS that Microsoft is entering the console wars. Of course, that was the Xbox. And the Tokyo Game Show, the Fall Tokyo Game Show. Maybe that's where John was when I... You know what? I think that's what it was. John was in Japan when I landed here in Chicago. So it was Dan Leahy, I think, who was supposed to meet me. He was the managing editor at the time. That's where he was. So, yeah, John's here talking about how the thing on most gamers' minds is the PlayStation 2, how it's ridiculously powerful, and whether the Dreamcast stands a chance. Of course, it didn't. I also think that it's interesting that this issue has a bunch of role-playing games in it, excuse me, which really speaks, I think, to John's preferences. He is a big fan of role-playing games. He was a big fan of Japanese role-playing games. I think he had actually already contributed some work to some Working Designs games on the Saturn at this point. I think on the Saturn. So, you know, I don't know that that was as big a marketing deal as we all hoped it would be, but it was definitely a preference for John, and I mean, I was totally in line with that too. So, yeah, we see on the masthead here, we've got Dan Leahy, who did go on to be the editor-in-chief of this magazine and then when it turned into Game Now, until we all shifted out to San Francisco, and Dan did not go with us. He chose not to go with us. You can see all the editors here. We'll go through. Well, there's Dan right there. But I'm just looking at the masthead here. Terry Minnick, of course, is Trickman Terry, who we're going to see a gigantic section with all the tricks in it in a minute. I'm looking for the actual art directors in here. Design, there we go. Art director Tim Bloom was a great guy. I believe he finally left the magazine to go move up to Alaska. I think he went to Alaska. No, yeah, that's where it was, Alaska. I know that he lived in a tent outside Anchorage for a while he was getting his life together up in Alaska. And then we also have Tim Davis, who was my biggest member. Tim was an awesome guy. I have not kept in touch with him, but he had a Mitsubishi Eclipse, I think, sports car. It was great. It was a great sports car. I used to hang out with him a lot. Anyway, going down the XG staff role here, we have Andy Barron, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. He was the first guy I met. When I came in the next day and met the staff, Andy was the first one there. So I was in the XG area, and Andy was... I think I'd actually met him before when I was there during my interview, but I sat and talked to him for a while while I was waiting for everyone else to get in. People didn't straggle in at like noon or 1 or anything like that, but people weren't there super early in the mornings. It was pretty loose and open hours-wise at Ziff Davis. But Andy, if I remember correctly, Andy tended to be there pretty early in the morning, and he left at a sort of a regular time. So yeah, I remember him sitting and chatting, and Andy was an awkward guy. He'd been at Ziff Davis for a long time. He'd written at EGM in the, I think, early 90s. We joke on Player One Podcast about how he wrote a lot of Ed Semrad's reviews, because Ed did not write all his own reviews. Andy wrote a lot of them, I believe. But he was a kid. His nickname was Cyber. A lot of these old school guys had nicknames for each other, and everyone called him Cyber Boy. So that had morphed into Cyber. But I remember sitting and chatting with him while I was waiting for Dan Leahy to show up, and him, again, in his awkward way, trying to relate to me about Canada, about being from Canada. And Andy was a big, I think it was laser tag player. Yeah, laser tag player. He played in tournaments and stuff like that. And that was the way he decided to relate to me about how he'd played in international tournaments against Canadian teams, and how the Canadian teams were always so tough, mostly because they played so dirty. And I was just like, okay, that's cool. I mean, nice guy. Awkward guy, but a really nice guy. Anyway, you can see here that he wrote the Final Fantasy V guide this month. He talked about playing a lot of Warhammer 40k. working on a website with Ben Durbin, who I honestly, as I'm reading these, I have no idea who Ben Durbin is. That was one of the things I found that in EGM we cleaned up a lot, is references to things that regular readers would not necessarily get, or even new readers, I should say, would not necessarily get. Talking about working on a website with a guy named Ben Durbin. Yeah, okay. And also Andy was engaged to be married at this time, hanging out with his fiancée, he said. Here's Dan Leahy. Dan was, again, the managing editor who turned into the editor-in-chief at one point. He don't think he wrote any guides, but he of course, was there running the show, especially when John wasn't around. Dan was a big sports guy, still is a big sports guy. Only guy I know who in my presence chewed chewing tobacco, which was a disgusting thing to see for the first time. Jim Mazurek was kind of, the way that I looked at him anyway, Andy was the senior guy, but Jim was kind of like the superstar as far as doing guides. I have not kept in touch with him either, but I know after he left XG, which I don't think he went through the transition when it turned into Game Now. He was doing official guides for like Prima and places like that. But yeah, talking about losing $25 in a hasty and somewhat ridiculous Soulcalibur bet, that was a big deal at the office. People would make bets on things like NFL Blitz and Soulcalibur tournaments and stuff like that. But yeah, he also, you'll notice, Jim had very strong opinions about video games, and he did not believe sports games should be a thing. Like reading here, he's a bit frustrated how his fellow editors would rather invest their time playing kids games like Bump and Blast Football 2000 or Scoop and Shoot Hockey 99. So yeah, Jim was an interesting guy too. Here's me. I don't remember if I actually wrote this bio, but we're going to read this here. Even while fielding a constant stream of questions regarding such Canadian legends as Degrassi Junior High and Bacon, the new guy managed to tear through Final Fantasy VI this month. Now he's trying to find time for some therapy after dealing with all his coworkers talking smack about his accent. When asked to say something profound for his first bio, he responded only with a. Very Canadian. I don't think I wrote that. I want to say that Todd Zuniga wrote that, who's the last guy on the list here. So Todd, who goes by Adrian now, and he's still on Twitter. I still talk to him every now and then. He ended up running Sports Anomaly for 1UP. When I moved to EGM, he moved to the official PlayStation magazine. Todd came here to this magazine after writing for Playboy. I don't know if he was a staff member, but he wrote for Playboy. I remember being told that a lot, not necessarily by Todd, but by John. I always got the feeling that Todd was sort of added to this roster to add some personality, which Todd had a lot of. And just more to make the magazine a little bit more fun and relatable. So I don't know if he was successful at that. Again, he moved to OPM after a while. Really good guy, though. All he cared about was meeting women. So hanging out with him was fun. Yeah, that's Todd. And he hammered through Suikoden II in this issue, which, again, I look at Todd, and knowing Todd even years later, I can't imagine him being a role-playing guy. But he went through Suikoden II. Anyway, he's also a big sports guy. He wrote a lot of our sports reviews at EGM. I want to take a minute to talk about this. So this, as a Sega fan from the Genesis era, and knowing how the Genesis' success had so much to do with their marketing, these ads always hurt me. It felt like after the Saturn, Sega really lost its way. And I mean, the Saturn had terrible advertising at the beginning, with the lady with the rings around her head and Ice Cube, and that terrible Theater of the Mind ad that was just more gross and confusing than exciting. But here with the Dreamcast, I always hated this ad campaign. I mean, it's catchy, it's eye-catching for sure, but it killed me that the Dreamcast was easily, especially before the PlayStation 2 hit, easily the most visually impressive games on the market, outside of maybe high-end PC games, but even that, I think it could compete. And they decided to go with this ad campaign that reduced screenshots of the game down to these tiny little thumbnails down the left-hand side. Now, again, there was a conformity here, and it was like easy to tell that you're looking at a Dreamcast ad for a Sega game. But I mean, you know, man, make this stuff bigger so people can see how good the games look. And it always drove me nuts. Final Fantasy VIII ad, nothing really to talk about there. Definitely, well, where I was working on Final Fantasy VI this issue, Final Fantasy VI was sort of the best of the original generation of Final Fantasy, I think. Everything kind of changed after Final Fantasy VII. I was not a big Final Fantasy VIII fan, to be honest. A little bit of an ad for Electronic Gaming Monthly, the chairman and CEO, so the Ziff Davis masthead over here, not important. This is an interesting ad for a lot of reasons. So one of the big things that we were always going for, and ads like Echo, this Echo ad really worked for us, was non-endemic advertising, I believe is the right phrase. So that meaning that it was ads for products that weren't necessarily related to what we covered. So it's not a video game ad, basically. It's not for a video game accessory, a game itself, a console, or anything like that. So this was seen as a huge win, and you'll see actually when we get into EGM too, there's a lot of non-endemic advertising in there. And yeah, it was super important because it meant that we were, of course, expanding our advertising market out beyond what our focus market was, which was huge. Mark Echo, of course, I also remember him coming into the office at one point, probably a year or two later, where he was shopping around the idea for a video game based on his product, which I think it morphed into that game called Getting Up, Contents Under Pressure, which was like an extremely underwhelming game. But it was kind of interesting to be in a meeting room with Mark Echo at that point. I guess a bit of a brush with fame is the only way I can describe that. I don't know. More non-endemic advertising. L2, which is just Levi's. Of course, the table of contents. Resident Evil 2 on the N64. Very highly regarded. Very highly regarded game.
Lock the door. Turn out the lights. Pretend it's just a nightmare. The most intense survival game ever created. Resident Evil 2. Now for Nintendo 64.
Not really much to say about that, though. Army Men. So, of course, 3DO at this point was a third-party publisher and not a console manufacturer anymore. That did not go well. Army Men always made me sad because 3DO struggled as a third-party publisher, I think. And the original Army Men, which I believe was originally a PC game, and it was an RTS, real-time strategy game, was, if I remember correctly, was a good game. It was really well received, and it was like they got that little bit of success and they went crazy and had to churn out an endless amount of Army Men games, most of which were terrible. And it always sort of, like I said, it always made me feel kind of bad for especially the people who probably worked on that first game or were forced to work on all these Army Men games where they had a good thing and they just ran it completely into the ground. But it was a tentpole franchise for 3DO. They kept churning those things out. In fact, there's probably more Army Men game ads in this issue, if I remember correctly. They were churning them out like crazy right up until the end. Right up until, I think it was Portal Runner was the name of the final game that felt like it was the final nail in the coffin anyway.
Nutcracker.
Introducing Army Men Sarge's Heroes, rated T for teen. The biggest little war there is for the PlayStation game console and Nintendo 64. Army Men Sarge's Heroes. Real combat, plastic men. Good to go.
Letter section. This was a huge deal back when magazines were still a huge deal. Although I thought it was interesting looking through these, how many, these are almost all via the internet, which used to be like, you know, Derek Bryan from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or something like that. And now almost every one of them are email addresses or just via the internet, and a lot of name withhelds too, which didn't used to be the thing. So of course we got the letter of the month, which somebody who also didn't like Final Fantasy VIII. I agree. Talking about how doesn't understand how we could like this game so much. Too many damn menus, sub-menus, every other menu you have to go to while you want to change something. The junction thing is a bunch of junk. Agree with that. I hated the junction system in Final Fantasy VIII. This guy's anger got him a free N64 controller. Good for him. He probably didn't have an N64. There was another... Oh, this thing I love. So, the Magnificent Mark. I was reading your WWF Attitude section in issue 63 and saw that you had a player box for a character named Whiskey Mark. I was wondering if he was actually programmed into the game for you to unlock, or did you guys at XG just make him up? If he's real, how do you get him? We've gotten a lot of questions on this, and sorry to disappoint, but yes, we made him up. Specifically, Whiskey Mark is a Todd Zuniga creation, but feel free to copy his design. Imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, you know. For more fun, be sure to check out EGM's natural-born superstar, Elephant Sack, which I believe was a Sean Smith creation. Elephant Sack and Whiskey Mark make appearances later on in other issues as well. What are you going to do? Let's see here. Top 10. Oh, this I thought was interesting too. So we ran a top 10 sales from the TRSTS NPD video game service. You see, you can actually have a number here to call. Marianne Pareka? Top 10 best-selling games of August 1999. When I was looking through this, preparing for this issue, it really kind of hit me how Nintendo or Nintendo consoles just owned late 1999. It's like first place, actually look, first place is a PlayStation game. It's messing me right up. First place is WWF Attitude, but then second place, Pokemon Snap, N64. Then Pokemon Pinball, GameCube. Pokemon Blue, GameCube, Game Boy. Pokemon Blue, Game Boy. Pokemon Red, Game Boy. There's another PlayStation game, but then down here, Mario Golf, N64, which, by the way, great game. So, I mean, you know, just a lot of, not only on Nintendo systems, but all Nintendo games. So, like, Nintendo is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, full half of the top 10 games sold in August 1999 were from Nintendo. So, it's funny because the N64 is derided, and I think rightfully so, and it was, I think, their worst-selling console to that point. But boy, Nintendo games still generated a lot of sales. It was frustrating in a way. News from videogames.com, which of course was GameSpot. They had, I think they did, I don't know if they changed the name to GameSpot, but they had the greatest URL ever, videogames.com, which they squandered, I think, eventually to rebrand themselves. I feel like this, I don't know if this is something that Expert Gamer was doing. So Expert Gamer, of course, evolved from EGM2. It went from EGM2 to Expert Gamer, I think, in 1998. And then in the early 2000s went to Game Now before it finally shut down. But I feel like this was a sort of a John Riccardi thing where it's like we've got to get... It felt like he was really pushing to add more than just tricks and walkthroughs to Expert Gamer. So adding some extra news was kind of the way to do that. And of course, this is about the PlayStation 2 reveal on September 13th. And again, you'll notice that it's without a space between the word PlayStation and 2. Fully backwards compatible with the original PlayStation, which was super important. It will debut in Japan on March 4th for 39,800 yen, which is roughly $375, and will launch alongside 12 games. Bundled with the revolutionary new DualShock 2 controller and 8 meg... I think it was bundled with a memory card? Huh. I didn't know that. Analog sensitive buttons. That was a thing that made racing games harder to play than they needed to be, as far as I was concerned. And really, the memory cards are super fast. Expandability options. US and Europe in fall 2000. Tekken Tag Tournament, The Bouncer, Dark Cloud, Gran Turismo 2000. We all know that never came out as a launch game. Good old Gran Turismo, still doing that today. And Kessen from Koei, which I don't think was really the beginning of the Dynasty Warriors series. Well, Dynasty Warriors actually started as a one-on-one fighter, but that was kind of, it felt like the beginning of a lot of characters running around the screen from Koei games. Another one of those terrible Dreamcast ads. Again, boy, House of the Dead 2 looks so good. Why make the screenshots so tiny? It's just dumb. Dumb, dumb, dumb. Not much to talk about on this page. Again, more letters. We're 30 pages in now at this, well, almost 30 pages in. A Q&A section. Sega has delayed full online gaming until Q3, Q4 of 2000 on the Dreamcast. I think that ended up hurting them a lot. Talking about Perfect Dark being delayed. Perfect Dark has been rescheduled for April by Nintendo. Who knows the official reason why? Some are speculating the Big N didn't want it to compete with another huge Nintendo title, Donkey Kong 64, this holiday season. And someone hoping that Sega gets back to their glory, which they kind of did for sports. After playing NFL 2K and seeing the shots of NBA 2K for the Dreamcast, I'm hyped about their chances of dominating the sports market, like in the Genesis days. They're off to a good start, but PlayStation has a strong hold on sports gamers' minds and wallets for now. We'll see. Of course, Sega and Visual Concepts ended up doing some great sports games, and I mean, the NBA 2K series is still going. Letter art was also a huge deal. We received so much letter art at Ziff Davis in general, and there were kids who just sent in some beautiful stuff, and it always felt like a big deal for them. I don't know why we were posting people's actual addresses here. That seems kind of terrible. Also a little bit of a typo there. NBA Basketball 2000. Not much to say here except, hey, remember when everybody had a sports brand? Fox Sports. That didn't last very long. Dino Crisis, of course, is the game that is the featured game in this issue. Dino Crisis, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Basically Resident Evil with dinosaurs, taking advantage of the Jurassic Park thing. Came with the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis demo. I forgot about that.
You don't hunt them. They hunt you. Dino Crisis, from the makers of Resident Evil. PlayStation.
Look at that. Nintendo Sports. And Sports. NBA Courtside 2 featuring Kobe Bryant. Nintendo had a sports label. Had some good games. Had some bad games. Everyone had a sports label. So here we are. Tricks of the Trade. So we're on page 30. Try to remember that. And I'm just reaching over my computer here. Pardon my arm. We're on page 30. I don't know how long this magazine is, but let's see if we can remember that page 30 is where Tricks started and how many pages of Tricks there are. Game Shark, of course, a big deal. So Trickman Terry Minnick, was the Tricks guy at Ziff Davis. And this was his section. And I think... really, I don't know that he got a whole... I tried to reach out to him before I recorded this, but I never heard back from him in time. I don't know that he had a whole lot of direction on what he had to cover here. I'm sure that, there was sort of like, make sure you get the newer games in there, but otherwise, you've got X number of pages to fill, hook up with one of the designers for page layout, and go to town. And that's what he did. And these were really treated like, of course, again, the internet was a thing, but this was really treated like a database, to the point that you can see over here how there's a new tricks index where it's calling out some of the new tricks that are in here, but a lot of the other stuff that's in here you would have probably seen before. I reached out to John to see if he remembered why there are asterisks beside some of these. I don't think that means they're new, because, like Pen Trisalon was a bit of an older game. Virtua Fighter 3 TB was definitely an older game on the Dreamcast. And they're not listed in the new games list, so I don't know that they were new games. I reached out to Trickman as well, but he didn't respond yet. I wonder if that was just a typo. Maybe they were new to this issue and those asterisks were supposed to be deleted, but either way. Yeah, so I mean, just tons of tricks, and we've got, you know, a bunch of Dreamcast tricks here. So we're going to tear through this, I think, fairly quickly. Again, Game Shark, a huge deal. There's a bunch of Game Shark codes for you. Now we're on to Nintendo 64. Again, this handy little color coding up top. More N64. This is interesting. So Lego Rock Raiders. Lego games are so, ever since like Lego Star Wars, they have a very specific formula they follow, which I think has been very successful. I love Lego games. I think they're fun to play. I think they're very relaxing to play. But there was a long time where Lego as a license was trying to sort of find itself, and they released a fair amount of Lego games that were not good. And this I believe is one of them. Lego Rock Raiders has nothing to do with Lego games as you think about them now. Some terrible CG there, but yeah, they existed well before Lego Star Wars. That's for sure. Still going with N64 codes. Does anyone remember HappyPuppy.com? That place was huge, and I think it's really interesting to see that a website that's not related to Ziff Davis in any way that I remember advertising in the pages of Ziff Davis. You know, videogames.com was not surprising to see in Ziff Davis magazine because Ziff Davis, and I don't know that they owned videogames.com, but they were partnered with videogames.com. But not Happy Puppy. Happy Puppy was massively popular in the 90s. It's where you went to get demos. Basically, they hosted a bunch of PC game demos. And they did news and stuff like that too, I believe. Like, you can see daily updates, previews, features, release lists, game clubs, game store. But I remember it as being the place that I would go to download game demos. And I believe at one point it was officially the most popular site on the net as far as like traffic goes. I believe it imploded eventually. And I think there was a lot of drama surrounding that. But yeah, this definitely brings back memories. TNN Motorsports Hardcore Heat. TNN, of course, is what became Spike. And I don't know if Spike exists in any form at this point. But TNN was the Nashville network, eventually rebranded as the National Network. I watched a lot of TNN. Excuse me. When it started out, a lot of country music. The Grand Ole Opry was on TNN. My dad was big into country music. But TNN also had a large motorsports broadcasting contingent. Some official NASCAR races were on TNN. A lot of different motorsports you could see on TNN. So I watched a lot of it as a kid. But yeah, this is, again, eventually turned into Spike, which of course hosted the Video Game Awards, which is evolved into what Jeff Keighley does every year, the Game Awards. But yeah, racing and country music. I watched a lot of TNN when I was a kid. Still in the N64 codes, here's another ad, 3DFX, so for, of course, graphic accelerator, 3D accelerator cards on PC. These ads, boy, have not aged well. On the TV here, there are two kinds of gamers in this world, the ones who still play on consoles and the ones who've actually seen breasts. Besides their own, I'm assuming. PC 3DFX PC accelerators is a better way to game. Hey, did you guys hear the one about the console gamer and the girl? Neither did we. A little lesson in love, gentlemen. Chicks don't dig guys who are behind the times. Sorry, but the good news is, when enhanced with a 3DFX Voodoo graphics accelerator, the performance and visual effects on your PC will kick the snot out of your console, thus bringing you ahead of the times. So pick one up. Oh, and lose the headgear. They hate that too. For more information, check out 3dfx.com. Yeah, so obviously has not aged well. Really, to be clear, not really acceptable back then, but considered acceptable. And I think it kind of points to the fact that gaming magazines were definitely leaning hard into the lad mag philosophy. I know when I go back and read, and we'll talk about this in subsequent episodes when I get into EGM, we definitely leaned into that as well. It was funny because we were very proud of the fact that we weren't just for kids, that we were for a more adult audience. And I think that was true. And every now and then we would defend ourselves by saying, well, you know, our reader surveys show that I think our readership is like 35 to 40% female or something. I'm just pulling those names out of my butt. I have no idea what the number was. But we definitely were taking a lot of our cues from magazines like Maxim at the time. The thinking being like, well, we're writing to an older audience. It's mostly male. Even if we would tell people it wasn't, we kind of considered that it was. And so that's who we tried to write for, rightly or wrongly. And this ad totally fits with that premise. Again, for better or worse, that's the way it was. But yeah, has not aged great. We're 10 pages into tricks now, by the way. More tricks. We're still on N64. I'm going to reach over and change my screen here a little bit. Ad for the Strike series, another series that started on the Genesis. Never really played Nuclear Strike. Now we're into PlayStation codes, more Game Shark codes. Neo Geo Pocket Color, what a great little console. Did not have a chance in North America. I think they were like $60. I love my Neo Geo Pocket Color. It was a great little system. And actually a lot of those games are now coming out on the Switch. So I highly recommend any of them. But yeah, it was just a nice little system with these little really clicky directional buttons, which was great too. Very arcade-like.
It's here! The revolutionary Neo Geo Pocket Color. With 16-bit power. Linked to the Sega Dreamcast. Revolving joystick. 146 color display. 6 cool styles. The graphics will blow you away. Neo Geo Pocket, way ahead of the game.
Directional buttons. PlayStation, more PlayStation codes. Juggernaut, a Jalico Myst style game, I think, like a horror game. I don't remember anything about it. I went to look it up and I was like, I still don't know what's going on with this. More codes, PlayStation. More non-endemic advertising with Left Field Rhythm and Stealth new album from Virgin Megastore, or available at Virgin Megastore. More codes. Vibra Kicker. We had one of these in the office and I tried it once. So basically it's just if you're sitting on the floor, it doesn't offer you any, I'm going to sound like an old man here. It doesn't offer you any lumbar support. But if you're sitting on the floor, you could connect the audio to this thing and I believe it would rumble based on the bass. And yeah, I mean, I guess that was good. I don't know. They did like a full seat as well. Like it was like a desk chair that I remember trying. I think I had one at home for a while, and all I remember doing is giving me a real headache. But it was a thing. Intensor was releasing they had like a vest you could wear as well. I forget what that was called. They had a bunch of different stuff like that was supposed to enhance the sound by, of course, it was basically a subwoofer that you were sitting on or that you were wearing. We're into 20 pages of tricks now. Still on PlayStation codes. Look, another sports brand. MTV, Music Television, Sports. Released by Radical Entertainment and THQ. These games tended to be awful. I don't know if this one was, but mostly MTV sports games were terrible, if I remember correctly. But, of course, the idea being licensed soundtracks, a big deal. I assume the MTV label made you think, oh, it's going to have some of the greatest music. You know, like from Blink-182, Ministry, Fear Factory, H2O, Voodoo, Glow Skulls, Joy, Lagwagon, 10-Foot Pole, Pulley, and Face to Face. If that gets you excited, check out MTV Sports Snowboarding for the PlayStation. Into the Game Boy codes. I loved my purple Game Boy Color. Dune 2000 with John Rhys Davies, who appeared all over the place in everything. Must have taken some time off from Wing Commander at this point. Poor Westwood Studios. I believe they're gone now. More Game Boy codes. We talked about the Radical Entertainment games in the previous episode when we were looking at Pocket games and how I believe these were the ones that used the voice. Yeah, this one included the Rumble feature, that's right. But I think they had voice in the game too, and that was like a big deal. There we are, another Army Men game, Air Attack. I think this one was actually pretty good, from what I remember. I think this one actually reviewed pretty well. But yeah, more Army Men. I told you, I knew there'd be another Army Man ad in here somewhere. Road Rash 64. This one makes me sad. Road Rash, another series that was kind of born on the Genesis, was amazing on the Genesis. On the Sega CD, it was one of the first games to have a licensed soundtrack that was worth a damn. And of course, the amazing 3DO version. I was playing that the other day, and boy, it still holds up. That game was so good. Of course, the 3DO version was changed and enhanced a little bit and came to the PlayStation and the Saturn, if I remember correctly. But yeah, and then I think we got 2 Road Rash games on the N64, and they were bad. I think we got some on the other ones on the PlayStation as well. They were bad. They were really bad. I'd love to do a video at some point of going through all the Road Rash games, but I haven't really decided how I'd want to handle that. Q64 says this is by far the best playing Road Rash ever. I don't believe that for a second. Such a shame that that series has gone dormant. I really think it would do well nowadays. All right, so we're into Game of the Month, page 62, which means with ads, we had 30 pages of tricks in, that's a good third of the magazine, I think. All right, so let's talk about this. So, let's read what Jim Mazurik said. So one of the things that we got to do as editors here was do a little blurb about the game we're playing. Let's just read what Jim had to say about Dino Crisis. As if a horde of relentless zombies in Raccoon City weren't scary enough, Capcom has decided to drop a group of government special ops onto an island infested with killer dinosaurs. I think eerie is the word you're looking for. Kidding aside, Dino Crisis is truly one of the few games I've played that really scared the crap out of me during gameplay. It's not just all pretty graphics either. After playing through it several times, it's actually quite easy to find little things that you missed on your previous games. With this in mind, I'd say that it definitely has strong gameplay. The detailed maps in this guide serve as the major part of your walkthrough and should be used in place of your in-game maps. Extra care was taken to ensure map accuracy, so you better appreciate them. And then we do a database, time to complete, 12 to 14, challenge, moderate, and then we have a few things we could add, like this one is something that Jim would have added himself, favorite weapon, SPAS 12, favorite outfit, ancient type, best advice, take your vitamins, and then these ones were kind of always in here. Also try, Resident Evil 3, system PlayStation, publisher Capcom, developer Capcom, rated T for teen. So yeah, Dino Crisis was taking advantage of the popularity of Resident Evil as well as the popularity of Jurassic Park and of all things dinosaur in general in the late 90s. But I think it was also worth pointing out, and I think this was the first time that Capcom did one of their survival horror games where they didn't use pre-rendered backgrounds. So, of course, Resident Evil used pre-rendered backgrounds and polygonal characters on top to make it look really pretty. But, of course, the camera didn't move. So everything was at weird camera angles. Every screen was stationary. It was like a flip scroll more than anything else. You had that transition, that door-opening transition. Dino Crisis does that as well, but it because everything's in 3D, it doesn't necessarily look quite as pretty as Resident Evil games, but the camera moves. So when you're walking around with, I don't know her name, when you're walking around with the main character, the camera's following you on some scenes. Now, on some scenes, it's not. And there are a lot of scenes in the game where the camera's stationary and you're at like a weird horror movie angle. But then there are scenes, especially walking down hallways and stuff, where the screen is scrolling. So that was kind of the big deal with this. And I will say, I went back and played this a little bit, and I'm assuming that I'm going to be running footage over this. For a PlayStation game, it looks good. The dinosaurs look good, which was important, obviously. So anyway, yeah. So this is a Jim Mazurek walkthrough. Jim was really good at this stuff. A couple of quick tips up front, obviously. A little blurb about the game here again. Levels, charts, mixture examples. You could mix resources in here. And then, yeah, like big maps about... And I'm guessing that whoever the art director was on this walkthrough built these maps. These don't look like something Capcom would have supplied. So I'm guessing that Jim went through or maybe we had maps that Capcom supplied that then Jim and our art director enhanced, which wouldn't surprise me either. But Jim would have gone through and sort of marked out all these different icons and things like that. All these little arrows. It was a lot of work. I think it's worth appreciating that these were done under really short time frames. I mean, we were talking about 1 month cycles here. And, to produce this required to play through multiple times very slowly to make sure that you're getting all of the detail that you need. And, especially with a game like this where you probably had to play through multiple times. And I don't know if it's got a time limit not a time limit, but, better endings based on time. Jim would have done that. So it was a ton of work, I have to say. And this guide looks great. More maps. I'm going to go, when I finally play through Dino Crisis, which sadly I've never done, I'm going to use these maps. But yeah, just the amount of work that went into this. And again, it's not fun reading unless you're actually playing the game, but I kind of love the idea of kids sitting here with an issue of Expert Gamer open to these pages while they're playing through. And when we get into later issues, remember for me it was Tomb Raider. I ended up getting maps made for Tomb Raider as well, and that was not easy or fun to do. So here's the ending and secrets. The different, see, he unlocked all the different outfits that you can get for, I still don't know the name of the main character. I didn't look. But anyway, that you can get for the main character. The different weapons, which again, means he had to play through the game multiple times. And look at that. We actually had win prizes. Email Jim Mazurek at ZD with what this picture is to win a free XG t-shirt. Only the first 5 entries will win. I love magazines. Cut to the chase. Chase HQ Secret Police. Another ad from Metro 3D. We talked about Metro 3D, I believe, in the last episode as well. Take a quick look here. So now we're on to the next game. Crash Team Racing. This is a game that people have told me for years that I would love. I've never really played it. This is by Dave Malik, who was, I think, officially an art director on this magazine, but he wrote this guide. I also did a racing guide later on for Sega Rally 2, and again, I'm going to keep saying they're not easy. None of this stuff was easy. Racing guides are rough, especially because you're trying to make sure that you're giving good advice, but at the same time, not everyone plays like you. Let's see what Dave had to say about Crash Team Racing. Naughty Dog has finished off the Crash series on a high note with what may be the most enjoyable game starring our marsupial friend from Down Under so far. Crash Team Racing has something for everyone, from the 20 tracks into the adventure mode featured in this strategy to the Mario Kart-esque antics of battle mode. If that weren't enough, they've thrown in a time trial and versus mode for good measure, packing in as much entertainment as possible to this addicting racing game. Characters are capable of several moves, like the power slide, which is essential to clock the best times. As the competition closes in on you, look to the vast array of power-ups to discourage them from passing. even if you weren't a fan of previous Crash games, CTR is definitely worth checking out. So again, not another game that I've played very much of. It's no Mario Kart, but only Mario Kart is Mario Kart at this point. But it was really impressive looking. It plays fairly similarly to Mario Kart with the power slides and picking up items and, shooting them at enemies and stuff like that. And I could see, like what Dave says is true. If you're not a Crash fan, this was still a good game that was worth playing if you liked kart games. But I think you really needed to be a Crash fan to fall in love with this game. And I never was. I was never a big Crash fan. Yeah, it says right here, learn the power slide. Best advice. So again, track maps that I'm sure were created by our artists. And I love the little, I forget the name of this Tiki Head guy, but I love that he's giving the tips on every track. That's a nice touch. And of course, character art that was probably officially provided by, well, it would definitely been officially provided by Sony. This is actually a pretty big strategy guide. Of course, Crash was popular, so. Speaking of N64 versions of PlayStation games, Destruction Derby 64, I never really played this one. I loved Destruction Derby 2 on the PlayStation, but yeah. Done by Psygnosis, so I'm sure it was probably pretty good. All right, moving on. These used to appear a lot in magazines, these ESRB rating system ads. I don't think these were paid for. I think they were considered like a public service. I could be wrong about that. I should ask somebody who would know better than me, but I'm pretty sure that like the ESRB didn't pay to have these pages in the magazine. And you can see that it's branded by Ziff Davis branding in general, but I think it was considered a public service. All right, Suikoden II. Oh, here, look, 12 issues for just $19.99, 1 year. Or you can even save more money. Yeah, subscriptions made the world go round in the magazine world. Here we are at Suikoden II. Suikoden, of course, one of my favorite RPGs. Suikoden 2, I've never played. Again, I feel bad. Every game we've touched here so far, I've never played, except for the footage you're seeing. That is it. That was the extent of the amount I've played these games. Let's see what Todd had to say about Suikoden 2. 108 character walkthrough. Now, I'm no king of RPGs, but I had a great time going through Suikoden 2. The story is compelling, filled with humor, betrayal, and some serious battles, but the catch is finding all 108 characters. Though I beat the game the first time by only finding 72, finding all 108 will reward you with a better rune, and the closing credits will be much more satisfying. Also, if you had the foresight to keep your save file from the first Suikoden, you'll be happy to know that it comes in handy for the sequel, that is, if you got all 108 characters the first time around. With it, you'll be able to recruit a familiar face from the first Suikoden game who is only available via this method. Overall, Suikoden 2 is definitely an enjoyable RPG with lots of intrigue. Fans of the first and RPG games in general would be wise to check it out. I loved how this started to happen with the use of memory cards and onboard memory, how features and characters and things would unlock based on you playing previous games in the series. It still happens today. I find it's not super frequent, but even in things like the Picross S series, if your Switch has a previous Picross S save on it, it usually unlocks more things in the game. I love that stuff. Suikoden, of course, an amazing RPG from Konami, an early RPG. Suikoden 2. I think one of the things that I love about Suikoden, looking back on it, is that this is around the time, and somebody mentioned that in the letters section here earlier, this is around the time that I find Japanese RPGs started to really go hard on the whole idea of having a bunch of different systems that, didn't, in my opinion, felt like they didn't add a whole lot, and it was just a whole lot more to learn, and it made some games a little bit too inscrutable for me as a fan of Japanese RPGs. Excuse me, whereas the Suikoden games felt like sort of an enhancement of 16-bit RPGs, stuff that you would play on the Super Nintendo, which I think is why I love them. Suikoden 2 looks gorgeous, too. I've been playing that a little bit. So one of the things you're going to find, we're getting into a bunch of RPG, the RPG walkthroughs here. They're not as visually stimulating as we saw with Crash Team Racing, as we saw with Dino Crisis, because these are massive games. These were not the featured games of the month, so you didn't have as much space. So you'll see here It's literally a list of characters and how to get them. I assume these are in chronological order. He also does a little bit of boss strategy at the bottom of each page. So every page is going to look like this. But that was kind of what you had to do. And you'll see the Final Fantasy V and VI walkthroughs are very similar. So yeah, I mean, we've got 108 characters to get through here. But again, you know, function was more important than style when it came to these walkthroughs. We're at 87. And then I think that's the final boss. We're down to 107. And here's the extra character, McDole, who is the main character from the first game. Ah, yes, that magical hero from the first Suikoden. Here's where you'll find him, and if you ever drop him from your party, here's where he'll return. This, of course, can only happen if you have the means and are capable of accomplishing the mandatory goal detailed on the opening page of this strategy, which is, of course, to have 108 characters collected in the original game and the save file. Here we are again, Final Fantasy V. So, Final Fantasy Anthology, the big selling point was, of course, Final Fantasy V was the game that was skipped, the Super Famicom RPG that was skipped when Final Fantasy games came to America. So, of course, the way that worked, the original Final Fantasy on the Famicom came here as Final Fantasy. Final Fantasies 2 and 3 on the Famicom were both passed over. 2, I feel like it was because that game is weird. And Final Fantasy took so long to come here that I feel like Square and Nintendo probably felt like it wasn't worth the amount of effort it would take to localize 2 and 3 when the Super Nintendo was really taking off here. So instead, we got Final Fantasy IV in North America, rebranded as Final Fantasy II, as I believe a launch game, or at least a launch window game for the Super Nintendo. Final Fantasy V was also passed over. I've heard lots of different reasons. The prevalent one seems that it was too hard for American audiences. And then, of course, Final Fantasy VI came here as Final Fantasy III. And then with 7, in the US, they decided to just start naming them properly. And we've had every Final Fantasy since then. So the big selling point with Final Fantasy Anthology, which was the PlayStation game, is that they were PlayStation versions of the Super Famicom games 5 and 6. And, of course, this was the first time we would officially be able to play Final Fantasy V in English. Of course, Final Fantasy V had the job system. 4 and 6, everything was kind of dictated by the story, so the types of characters you had, the party you had, the types of characters you had anyway, they were dictated by the story, their jobs, as it were. So dragoons and healers and mages and fighters and black belts and things like that. Whereas in Final Fantasy VI, they were dictated by the story, but eventually you got to choose who was in your party. Final Fantasy V is all about the job system. So that's what this is about. And honestly, it makes it one of my least favorite games. Just because the job system didn't resonate with me. But anyway, excuse me, this is by Andy Barron. Let's see what he had to say about Final Fantasy V, Square's lost masterpiece. All right. You think you're an RPG expert because you waltzed right through Final Fantasy 7 or 8? Be prepared to be shamed with Final Fantasy V, arguably the best Final Fantasy ever. This one won't look familiar because it was never released here. It was deemed too tough and left by the wayside. Instead, we got crap like Secret of Evermore, but we're not bitter. Final Fantasy V has the job system that some of you may recognize from Final Fantasy Tactics. While you're stuck with the same 4 characters, well, almost, for the whole game, you can change their abilities at will. The net effect is that character customization possibilities in Final Fantasy V are nearly endless. This guide will give you a basic walkthrough, more of a flowchart really, as well as a guide to the game's numerous bosses. We won't spoil the awesome story. It says here the toughest boss is John Riccardi. I want to point this out too, something that happened a lot in these early issues of XG for me that I realized later. When you see things like this, the guide will give you a basic walkthrough as well as a guide to the game's numerous bosses. In parentheses there where it says more of a flowchart really, that was absolutely John adding a note. Not saying that it wasn't meant to be published. It was meant to be published, but that was the way John sort of fixed a lot of things in editing, was just to add in parentheses some clarification. You see it a lot. When you go back knowing that, you'll see a lot in a lot of the writing in these issues. Again, This is not beautiful looking. I mean, it's got some great Amano artwork, which was, of course, officially sent out. But it is literally like just a point-by-point, do this, and 4 columns fitting as much as possible in a tiny space. I mean, we're starting on page 100, and we're talking about a 50-hour RPG with the job system. Let's see how many pages we take to get through this all. There are obviously, you know, little box outs here to talk about the different job classes, to give you sort of an overview of how you want to handle that, some strategies to do so, that we have multiple endings. Here's a list of all the bosses. And actually, it's all bosses on these 2 pages now. Still bosses. And there's the final boss. So we have gone 7 pages for a 50-hour RPG. But again, you know, we had limits to what we could do. The space we had. These were not the most important games in the issue. And so that's how it went. All right, moving on to my strategy. You see, I don't have an email address yet. True Classics Never Die by Greg Stewart, the Canadian guy. Take a drink of water here. Okay. Before Final Fantasy V, the other half of Final Fantasy Anthology, again, that's a note from John. Before Final Fantasy V arrived, excuse me, Final Fantasy VI was widely believed to be the best Final Fantasy released in the US. Many fans still do believe it, actually. Final Fantasy VI brought together an amazing story, state-of-the-art graphics for its time, an incredible musical score, and innovative gameplay, making for one of the most memorable RPG experiences of all time. Now it's back. This guide features a basic walkthrough for the game, as well as a detailed guide for beating each of the game's bosses. There's a nifty Esper list as well. Thankfully, outside of adding CG intro and ending scenes and some neat new bonuses, Square chose not to mess too much with a good thing. The experience remains just as magical as it was back in 1994. So sit back, relax, and revel in the knowledge that you're about to experience RPG history all over again. So again, very much a point-by-point walkthrough. I did this, I mean, I did play through it. I churned this out in 5 days. But I played through it multiple times anyway. So I literally was just saying, okay, here's your first task, here's how to do it, here's your next task, and it was mostly by memory. I will admit that I did have a guide from GameFAQs open just to make sure I didn't forget anything along the way. But otherwise, yeah, it's a step-by-step guide through Final Fantasy. Again, a 50-hour game, probably in 7 or 8 pages. We're going to find out. Well, we start on page 108. Super different box outs here saying like the chainsaw tool is actually super important because it's Edgar's most powerful weapon for most of the game. So it's worth going and getting it. Little things like that, like the auction house, because there are special things you can get in the auction house. Pretty proud of that picture worth 1,000 wounds title there. Actually, that was the most fun part of this, was coming up with sort of the subtitles for each section. Some of them are just literally literally just talking about what's happening, but most of them are like, you know, I don't know, I kind of like this. Where the Magitech's made. Eating with the enemy. Picture worth 1,000 wounds. Deja vu all over again. I love it. So creative. Hey, look at that. Another subscription card. Talking about a powerful glove and relic combo, the Moogle Charm, the Economizer, the Bum Rush Blitz, where to learn that stuff, all super important. There's Kefka's Tower, the final battle. We are 5 pages into this walkthrough, and there's the final battle of a 50-hour game. And then, you know, an Esper list, which was important because the Espers you could, I believe you equipped them. And, you know, you didn't have everything equipped at all times. So this kind of gave you an idea of what each thing did, which I think was great. And it's a long, long list. Oh, and here's the final battle. The 4 different stages of the final battle. Super exciting. All right, Soulcalibur, I don't think was new at this point. Maybe it was. I don't remember, because this is October 1999. No, November 1999. So it was right after the Dreamcast came out. So yeah, it was pretty new in the US. Again, this is a hardcore fighting game guide that I am not going to read. Like, I think the text is actually... Is it smaller? Eh, maybe not. It kind of looks smaller. There's definitely a lot more of it, though. So this is the Ultimate Survival Guide, written by Ryu Niten, freelance caliber freak. That is not whoever wrote this. That's not their real name, I don't believe. I spoke to John about this recently to see if he could remember who actually wrote this guide. He couldn't, but he agreed that that's probably not this person's real name. It might have been somebody who shouldn't technically have been writing guides for us, but did. We'll admit that it's been a long month waiting for the second part of XG's Advanced Soulcalibur Strategy Guide. Oh, so this is a part 2. But now that it's here, you can rest assured that you'll be the best player on your block with each and every character in the game. Not only do we dive into the secret characters this month, but we also include a detailed and comprehensive FAQ on the mission battle mode by our in-house survey extraordinaire, Jim Mazurik, so he contributed to this. Use it to find any of the secret levels, costumes, and other hidden tidbits held within Soulcalibur's toy box of a reward system. Also, please don't forget to use the first 2 pages as an intro to the rest of the strategy. Believe me, it helps. So yeah, the first 2 pages here talking about basic move keys, different general strategies for all the characters, before we get into the actual, I guess, character guides. Extra modes and stuff. And then, yeah, we got character Rock. Soulcalibur was a real good game. Sungmina, Cervantes, Lizardman, Yoshimitsu. Oh yeah, Yoshimitsu was in this game. I forgot about that. I should use this and play this game again. Huang, Siegfried, Edgemaster, and Inferno. And that's it. And then we're into the back of the magazine. Chips and Bits, of course. I love looking through old magazines. And it's funny because I've been looking through a lot of European magazines, especially Mean Machines. And the marketplace was a regular thing for Ziff Davis magazines at the very end. And American magazines in general, where you get places like Chips and Bits and Die Hard Game Club and things like that, advertising at the back to sell used games. That was normal. It's funny reading European mags like Mean Machines, and if there are like 50 ads in the magazine, 48 of them are for places like this, for computer stores. And like then there's 2 or 3 ads from like game publishers and manufacturers and things like that. It's very interesting. Anyway, Chips and Bits. I remember ordering games from these guys at one point. Big deal. This Ultimate Gaming Ring, I still would love to hear from anyone who actually ever won this thing. This ad was in the back. Versions of this ad was in the back of so many magazines in the late 90s and early 2000s. Like, I don't think any of this was real. I don't think anyone ever won it. But that'd be a hell of a setup to win. Like, you're looking at that whole, they're talking about that whole picture is what you'd win. That big screen TV, a Nintendo 64, Saturn, PlayStation, arcade controllers, a Game Boy, it looks like, a gaming PC. It looks like all that stereo equipment on the side, and I'm guessing some kind of satellite service from Sony. But like there, you know, the entry fees. I don't think anyone ever won that. Game Over I always loved. Of course, remember, this is a time before the internet, before you could go online and find a video of the ending of any video game in history. I loved Game Over stuff in video game magazines. I think Die Hard did it as well. And this lends itself as well to what was kind of a rule when I started at Ziff Davis. I mean, you saw at the beginning that top 10 for August of 1999. I think there were 3 Pokemon games in that top 10. Red and Blue and Snap, I believe, were all in that top 10. Pokemon was huge. The show was really popular at that point. The games were super popular at that point. It was just nuts. And so we had kind of a standing order that we had to get Pokemon, and specifically Pikachu if possible, into the issues wherever we could, whenever we could. And I feel like that's what this is. Again, Pokemon Snap was super big anyway, so it made sense to cover it, but I think this is us getting Pokemon into the issue in some relatively significant way. By the way, I played Pokemon Snap recently on my Twitch channel, and I adored it. I had never played it before. I'm not a big Pokemon fan. I I felt like I was too old to get into it, or I feel like looking back on it, it's that I was too old to get super into it, and so that's why it never interested me too much. But man, Pokemon Snap is a fantastic game. Highly recommend playing it. And it's funny, even though I've never been a big Pokemon fan, been so inundated by it over the years by having kids, because it's still popular, and being surrounded by friends and video game nerds who were so into it. I can still name a bunch of the original generation Pokemon. When I was playing it, I was like, oh, you know, there's a Mankey, and there's Meowth, and there's Pikachu, and there's I could name a bunch of them, which I thought was hilarious personally. But anyway, yeah, Pokemon Snap, great game. This game over thing is wonderful. And then of course we had a little contest here where you would see a picture of an ending, and then you had to guess the game and get a T-shirt. I don't think I ever got one of those Expert Gamer T-shirts. I'm gonna have to get a hold of John and find out what happened there. Another used game company or import game company, GameCave.com. I wonder if they're still around. That logo looks surprisingly like VideoGames.com. Game Music Online. I doubt they still exist. Advertiser Index for all the different advertisers. There's a VideoGames.com. So I guess it's not exactly the same. Ad. Another Funko Land. Oh, I miss Funko Land so much. There was a Funko Land between the office and my second apartment in Chicago, and that was back before collecting old video games before it sucked, before it was super expensive, and so it was nothing to stop in at that place, just pick up a handful of cartridges for like $50 or $100, and just that's where a lot of my current cartridge collection came from, was stopping in at Funko Land on my way home from work every other week. Those were the days. Next month, an Expert Gamer, December 1999. Got the holiday stocking ready? Good, because Expert Gamer is going to stuff it with the best strategies you can find. Next month, we absolutely blow the lid off of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. You'll be racking up zombie carnage in no time with a little help from us. Also, we continue to cover Pokemania, there it is again, Pokemon, with an extensive, and we mean extensive, guide to Pokemon Yellow. Throwing a Grandia strat, some NFL Blitz 2000, and other Dreamcast quick hits, and you've got a must-have issue of XG. Now, Grandia was the first guide I ever started working on for Expert Gamer, but it was for the subsequent issue. I was playing that at home at the time on the PlayStation when I came in here to do this over the week. Electronic Gaming Monthly, December 99. Donkey Kong 64, Nintendo and Rare team up on what could well be the biggest game this Christmas season. The first game that needs the expansion pack. Is it enough to save the N64 this holiday season? Is the game up to the standards of Rare's previous Donkey Kong efforts? No. We'll have they didn't write that. We'll have the full scoop for you. Holiday time means an avalanche of games will be hitting the shelf soon, and EGM will tell you what you should be asking Santa for. Plus news from the recent Tokyo Game Show. Donkey Kong 64 was terrible. Official PlayStation Magazine. With the new millennium approaching, we look to the future of computer entertainment with the most massive blowout of coverage of the PlayStation 2. OPM's got everything you want to know and more on the system that will revolutionize gaming and entertainment in general. But there's plenty of juice left in the current PlayStation with games like Dune 2000, NBA Live 2000, Say Hello to MJ, Twisted Metal 4, and Tomorrow Never Dies. Also, Gran Turismo 2 highlights are playable demos. Remember, the PlayStation, official US PlayStation Magazine came with a demo disc every month, which was one of the main reasons it sold so well. A few more ads for a couple different places. Mix, Game Express, McVan's Video Games. And then an Interact, what is it? It's a Sharkwire Online. Also a Game Shark that goes online. Interesting. And then the back cover, which is another one of those terrible Sega Dreamcast ads. And that's it. That was my first issue of Expert Gamer. Expert Gamer number 65, November 1999. Again, let's reads of Expert Gamer are a little bit rough because there's not a lot of opinion there to talk about. It's pretty cut and dry. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed these stories. It was kind of fun to reminisce, I have to say, because this was, well, 23 years ago, almost, for me, young 20-something-year-old Stuart. So yeah, again, I hope you've appreciated this. Please check out my other Let's Read videos, my other videos on this channel, actually, if you haven't already. especially Generation 16, where I go through the history of the Sega Genesis, one game at a time. And, of course, check out Player One Podcasts, which we are approaching our 800th episode as of the recording of this. And check me out playing old games like these on Twitch TV/Seward every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. Thank you so much for watching this. Really appreciate your support. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave a comment in the section below if you liked what you saw, or if you didn't like what you saw. Give me some memories. Did you read Expert Gamer? Was I your favorite guide writer? I bet I was. Thanks for watching.